Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Are you craving for that special meal that will entice your taste buds and leave you with lasting thrilling memories? Look no further. Spice Island Bulenga has got your answer. Natural, fresh and delicious juice, the best meals. Don't miss our daily specials from Monday to Sunday. Pizza Wednesday, Saturday Pizza Bonanza, you buy one and take two. Come dine with us and feel the experience. We are located at Prime Shopping Center in Bulenga, Mitiana Road. For inquiries, call us on 0704111720. Spice Island, we treat your cravings. Hi Rogers, can I ask you something?
Shoot.
What does corruption mean?
Well, summarily, corruption is abuse of public power for personal gain or for the benefit of a group to which one owes allegiance. For example, when a public office is abused by an official accepting or soliciting a bribe. By the way, private people can be corrupt too, like bribing police officers to escape fines.
Okay. So exactly how does that concern me?
Well, do you pay taxes?
I guess, yeah. What does that have to do with this?
Everything. Because those taxes you pay are supposed to facilitate services you use, like water, electricity, roads construction, medicines in hospitals, name it.
Okay, that is much bigger than I thought. But it can be stopped, right?
Well, yes it can, although it may not be as easy as it sounds. And here is the reason why. Corruption roots are grounded in our country's social, political, economic, bureaucratic traditions and policies.
So, what has kept it going this long? I mean, why don't we stop it?
Well, the main reason why it has been here for so long is because institutions are weak, either as a result of poorly defined ethical standards of public service, weak administrative and financial systems, or ineffective watchdog agencies.
What can we do to stop it?
At a national level, we must focus on strengthening the independence and effectiveness of public institutions that fight corruption. At a personal level, we must commit to never giving a bribe.
I promise I'll never give a bribe.
Well, that's a great decision you have made. Me and you now have to spread this message to all our friends. If we all do our part, corruption will be no more.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk. The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Must mention briefly this Somali thing.
Yeah. A very good evening, our viewers. We thank you again for joining us this evening. It's yet another edition of the Hotline Show. As always, we discuss quite a number of things happening within our country and, of course, the entire continent and beyond. So many things have been making rounds in our news headlines here on the African continent and globally. And we believe it's high time we also delve into this and see how much we bring it to the local understanding of our own people here. Today, just on the 25th day of May, 2023, the Organization of African Union, which is currently the African Union, commemorated, was making 60 years since its inception in 1963. You know, this was an idea that was carried on by the four great leaders of this great continent, Africa. And this was a dream, this was a vision for leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Apollo Milton Obote, and so many other prominent leaders at the time who really had a dream. They had a vision that at one point Africa should be, on the right path. But the question is, ever since the inception of the African Union, or the organization of the African Union in 1963, do we still walk towards that path the great vision bearers of this dream had? Well, tonight, just like as always, I am joined by Mr. Ochieno Joseph. He is a leadership candidate at the Uganda People's Congress. This is the oldest party, one of the oldest parties in this country, Uganda. Of course, we'll be looking at quite a number of things. And first of all, before Mr. Ochieno comes in, I want to apologize to our audience, our viewers. We are supposed to discuss the press freedom in this country. Unfortunately, the panelists who were supposed to join us, they were caught up by, some uncertainties, and they could not make it. So we will be discussing the African Union. We'll be discussing the Anti-Gay Act now, which has been assented to by the president this morning, and quite a number of things. You're most welcome, Mr. Ochieno.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Just to say, Uganda People's Congress is officially the oldest political party in this country as Uganda National Congress.
Okay.
It's a privilege, but it's a burden of responsibility that even I, the younger generation, I feel that's absolutely a big responsibility for us, particularly as this country builds to mainstream itself in a new sense of dictatorship 60 years on. And in Africa, we're supposed to be discussing press freedom. You look around the continent, freedom and freedom of expression and of speech, and then you find polity that founders of Uganda National Congress then looked at before independence is seemingly not only going down in this country, but on this continent. So it's a huge burden, but a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ochieno, and we always thank you, and we're always grateful for your dedication towards developing and building this country, using our, this platform as a voice for this country. Well, this year, the African Union theme was looking at the journey towards achieving the social, economic, and political journey for the African continent. And I think this is a great reflection when you look at, when we try to tap into the visions for the persons who really conceived the idea of having the African Union to bring African leaders together so that they can have a common agenda for this great continent. In your own view, one of your greatest leaders for the UPC was among the people who are really so much into this, the African Union. Do you think we still move towards the line, the direction, the vision bearers for this great African Union had for the continent?
I was discussing the question of African independence, African identity, the challenges facing the African continent in global polity today, and the conversations around new global interests, you can call them now global threats, where they imagined powers like China, imagined powers like India, imagined powers like Russia, which traditionally would have been there, as alternative powers to traditional Anglo-American Western powers. And I was looking at contemporary African leaders, including how they respond and react to either provocations, situations, or challenges placed by these agencies and these nations. And I found it rather sad, the more I reflected, that there is a total, today, almost certainly a total absence of leadership on the entirety of the continent. I say that with a heavy heart. One, as I said, as a member and the leader of Uganda People's Congress, who is about to turn 60 himself, but also as somebody who's been lucky to go around the continent and to engage a number of leaders, including serving and non-serving African leaders. And I always keep asking myself, where is the genuine African leader today? Where is that man and or woman? And leadership is not about a personality, how tall, how beautiful, how handsome. Sometimes we get it wrong. But it's really about a holistic personality, including visions and ideas
Yes.
and sets of programs. And where is it? I find it extremely wanting. So then,
on the entire
on the entire continent, on the
you do not
entire
see that.
continent, yeah, I struggle. I mean, of course, there are a few names here and there. I struggle. Then I looked back to the generation beyond contemporary. If you look back to 20 or so years ago, post Mandela, and I even wonder Mandela's fame and popularity and power and opportunity, whether or not he provided the leadership that this continent, as a peoples, needed. That sort of is going to be left for scholars. But this fantastic guy, of course, is our icon. But you get what I'm trying to say. No, beyond Mandela, then you look at possibly Thabo Mbeki. Came in, and I know he was smeared by particularly Western media and Western powers. Initially, I nearly bought into the idea that he looked arrogant, but the point then was that whatever else, because we're all human beings, the guy had a specific agenda, a specific program. He was conscious, building onto the African liberation's conversations, that no, this continent needed to own elements of its own program in terms of reality and the future. And so, hence the arrival in short of programs like the New Partnership for Africa's Development, NAPAD. And so that, beyond NAPAD, fast forward to today, the changing of the name from the Organization of African Unity to the African Union, I actually feel possibly nostalgic that we should actually just go back and say with Organization of African Unity. Possibly I sense a bit of vibes there. I actually don't know what majorly changed since then. So it's a huge challenge. But say back here, I ask myself in the Republic, Ignatius Musazi and co., these are guys in the late 40s. These are guys in the early 50s. These are guys moving towards the 60s as UPC was being founded. These are Africans who are conscious, looking at themselves, looking at identities within Uganda, looking at the diversity within the region, looking at our needs, looking at the health of our people, looking at the education of our people, looking at agriculture of our people, looking and conscious of the fact that we're occupied by Britain, but looking at the fact that we were a third-rate citizens in our own country. The British are at the top, the Asians were in the middle. Where was the African? Where are we, the owners of this land? And they said, no, we need to be able to rejiggle. Hence, the creation and founding of Uganda People's Congress, Uganda National Congress and Uganda People's Congress as a political party to holistically address the broader needs of the African persons and personalities. When it became Uganda People's Congress, I'm using this to contextualize. When we became Uganda People's Congress in 1960, apparently part of the conversations when they were merging Uganda National Congress and Uganda People's Union to form Uganda People's Congress, we became the peoples without an apostrophe, by the way. So all peoples, in terms of identities, they were embedding reality, saying that, look, in this country, you also have whites. In this country, we also have Asians, and some of them are founding members. So you can see the broad thinking of then humanity. So you're pushing ideology, putting human needs, in context, at the forefront. And so when we become a People's Congress, it's no surprise that, well, granted, we are a center-left political party, by and large, socialist left. You can call it social democrat, you can call it anything, but it was a left-leaning political party. So we simply said no. At the core of our programs will be people-led. So at independence, what did we do? I'm being very specific here to contextualize, to give you a longer answer, but I hope you find it useful and your viewers. What do? You create an agricultural revolution across the country. You create a health revolution across the country. You create at the core people involvement, meaning people education across the country. You create infrastructure revolution across the country. You revolutionize the question of identity, meaning that by the time of the 1970s, there was going to begin a process in which you can't become a member of parliament for Kawempe, without having a touch with somebody, either in Karamoja, one or two other sub-regions. A bit of a complex thing, I don't want to go into it. Something like that. But then beyond that, we're saying that youngsters were coming from Kigezi to go and study in Sebei, and these institutions were there, built new across the country. We're building a nation state. Fast forward beyond that nation state, we're not stopping there. I'm talking about African Union, and I'm talking about founding parents of this continent. These guys recognize that no, Uganda cannot be free and independent unless the whole of Africa is free. Just like following on to what Kwame Nkrumah said. So Bote turned it into a practical term. So said, no, we're going to support the liberation struggles in Congo, yes, in other countries. We're going to commit ourselves to liberation struggles across Africa. And so there was no contradiction.
Mr. Ochieno,
yeah.
You know, you've raised something that you're struggling to spot some leaders in Africa who maybe bear, to a certain point, the vision, those who conceived the ideas of a united Africa had. But I want to mention a few names. When you go to Ghana, with the exception of what happened during the times of Jerry Rawlings, who had to execute, and you know, I'm sure you know that story. But you see that
Museveni's friends, the early guys.
Yeah. Yeah, he passed on during, I think, 2 years back, during the COVID era. Now, with the exception of his story, I think when you look at a country like Ghana, the only dark story they have is during the times of Jerry Rawlings. But after that time, you see that they have had quite a smooth path compared to other countries. Then when you look, with the exception of, again, like the North African countries, those ones, they have their own issues. But now, even Museveni himself, when he came, is someone who, for those who listened to him by then, you could see a visionary person. I do not know whether maybe along...
Well, for those he injected, I listened to him, but I didn't...
Yes.
But anyway, carry on.
And then when you even remember people like Kenneth Kaunda, he had to lose an election.
Yeah.
You know, now when you would ask, with these great men of the time, you would think they would maybe cling on to power, like it's being done somewhere, and maybe, but time came, they went into an election, they lost and they had to walk home. Now, I think Africa is just being derailed off the right path by the current generation leaders.
Yes and no. I'm not quite sure whether your assessment on Ghana is accurate, actually. Beyond Kwame Nkrumah, I would struggle to find, because at the end of the day, this thing should also not be that just somebody emerges and regardless, you're a warmonger, you emerge and then you brutalize people. Because I know that there's temptation now to present Amin as a relative hero.
And maybe just in addition, before you come in. If you look at Robert Mugabe, Robert Mugabe was a great president, by the way. With the exception of what happened after, those similarities with what is happening in Uganda. But if you try to assess Robert Mugabe, if you remove the element of overstaying power, Mugabe was a great leader.
I was actually going to use Mugabe as an example because he falls within the bracket of the early independence because he was the first independence leader for Zimbabwe.
Yes,
and Zimbabwean independence was directly linked with the coup in Uganda, Idi Amin. And in fact, we linked in 1972 the demand for us to pull out of the Commonwealth, the thing that annoyed the British Prime Minister. It was actually linked, one, to arm sales to apartheid South Africa, or the British not supporting the apartheid regime in Zimbabwe. So it's very, very much linked. I am lucky and privileged to have met Mr. Mugabe and regarded him highly, and I defended him highly, including in global spaces.
Yeah.
But I must also say that, well, towards his end, I was also substantially critical that he lost path.
Yeah.
And he lost path when the sanctions business, when they went into war with Anglo-America, I still understood and I knew exactly what it was. And I visited Zimbabwe and visited those farms, and I actually know substantial elements of the other story. And Mugabe is also one of the most negatively reported stories on the African continent as far as African leaders are concerned. Granted, once dealing with the global threat became one set of a big problem, he went towards the person, and I think once his wife came in and power play started coming and the factions broke up in ZANU-PF, it was very disappointing. I was quite disappointed seeing that Mr. Mugabe wanted now to die in power. But beyond that, the reason Mugabe was vilified is the reason why UPC is struggling, and is the reason why Dr. Milton Obote is vilified. And these guys, at history time, your beautiful camera lady is in their 20s. These are people who in the next 20 years, if they continue reading very seriously, they will be actually seeing this as these heroes that they should write about. But broadly, I was saying, in Ghana, beyond that, what you're saying is Ghana today, if you're now talking about stabilizing democracies, Ghana you can count.
Yeah.
And you can count Ghana. Again, I'm lucky to, I have privilege to have an idea that about 10, 12 years ago, when a particular election took place in Ghana, and there was a conversation of whether or not one side had rigged the elections.
Yeah.
It is the Ghanaian military intelligence, military actually, who took a position and met the two opposing political leaders in a room and locked them in and said, look guys, you know who won the elections between the two of you guys. You need to decide who of you to be the leader. For us, as far as we are concerned, we are going to protect. They didn't even talk about the constitution. We're going to protect the people of Ghana. It was out of that meeting that these guys packed by, somebody conceded, somebody emerged. And since then, Ghana is a continued democracy. So perhaps it's a big and important lesson for military strong men across the continent, including my country. But for that, I must say that, well, maybe it's not too late to offer our condolences to the families, Ugandan families, that are grieving, including those that may not already know whether or not they've lost loved ones in Somalia following the incident that took place there the other day. So really our very sincere condolences, and talking leadership, I hope that these are some of those things that will be resolved at one stage. So that is it. What I was saying was that beyond the early founding parents, that included actually Kenneth Kaunda, by the way.
Yes.
Kenneth Kaunda, Milton Obote, Julius Nyerere, and Oliver Tambo of ANC,
Yes,
were
in South Africa.
the leaders of the Mulungushi Club, which is basically the last echelon of the Southern African Liberation Struggle School, what was it called, the club of frontline states seeking the liberation of Southern Africa. But that is one thing. The other is predominantly the big thinker in the continent. Look at how Patrice Lumumba was massacred. Since then, you're right, talk about Robert Mugabe. Mugabe attempted, and that's why I wanted to have a special space for him. Once Zimbabwe attained our independence, and it was a deal, the British were supposed to finance a redistribution of land in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And the British, cheeky as they are, they thought that 10 years later Mugabe might forget. And when they were now trying to instruct Mr. Mugabe, Mugabe said no. And by the way, the so-called farm invasion, and you're a journalist and journalists watching and listening, was not a farm invasion, or rather ordered by Mugabe. Once the deals failed, and again, I know the 1997 Commonwealth Conference in Edinburgh, in UK, where I was lobbying against Mr. Museveni's continued blocking of political parties. The Blair new government did not respond that very well. I think they're being instructed to Mr. Mugabe, and Mr. Mugabe was very confidently saying, no, you can't pull us around. When relations died, these are the principles of leadership I'm talking about on the African continent. Mugabe said, look, the land that we're talking about, that we're refusing to finance as per agreement, the redistribution process, was our land, and it was taken through force and blood and hanging our people. And they say the so-called war veterans, and they were indeed war veterans of the Zimbabwean Liberation War, who were then rather pushing Mugabe for quicker land reform. I know there are also so many outsiders of the story, but this is a factual story. These guys were now the radical wing of ZANU-PF, and they're predominantly in former soldiers. And they say, no, this thing must take place. And so Mugabe was under pressure. So when these guys went to invade the farms, Mugabe said, and I remember on television and openly, that look, these are Zimbabweans, these are their land. We've been begging you guys for the last 10 years that we should sort out these things amicably. I am not going to send Zimbabwean police to pull Zimbabweans away from the land that belongs to them. In other words, the war veterans had now invaded or rather occupied predominantly white farms. And Mugabe said, not going to send the police to pull them. Said, we told you so. So in a way, Mugabe was actually fairly bold on that.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, he was right. In fact, as a matter of fact, he was right. But there is this business of Africans playing, mini inferiority complex, where we have the incapacity to take a position and say yes. That has been lacking. Fast forward to about now. If you talk about African democracies, Ghana is one. If you talk about African democracies, Leopold Senghor was leader then with the Obotes, but currently you could say Senegal is, although they're struggling also with the constitution amendment. I don't know what disease, indeed, what disease pinches Africans. You can talk about the Botswana of this world. I've met one or two of their leaders.
And Botswana actually currently also they have some issues. What's his name? Masasi?
Yeah.
Masisi actually, it's called Masisi. He's also having some battles with his predecessor. They have power struggles. Yes.
But in terms of the processes of democratic reforms, what they did from independence, they managed their comments by and large fine. Then you come actually back to my South Africa, and I've always been very, very particular about South Africa, because I expected South Africa to provide the bigger leadership post Mandela and post
apartheid.
Yes, and post Mbeki. Cyril Ramaphosa was actually my favorite guy. You can see we follow some of these guys, at the early times of the collapse of apartheid. So we thought, we liked him because he was a trade unionist, he was an activist, he was articulate, things like that. Somewhere, somehow, I don't know. I don't think he presents the big voice that the continent actually deserves.
Well, Mr. Ochieno.
But just before we do that, I just want to tell you a bit of a mini surprise. I actually find it interesting that someone like Paul Kagame, that his posture and his articulations, and if you sense, and I think I've said in this program, you may not agree with him, and I don't really agree with him, particularly their own record in this country and their abuse of UPC that made them and the abuse of Uganda that made them. I don't. But if you see where this guy is, he has an idea about Rwanda, his own way. It's dictatorial quite clearly. But the guy has an idea, and you can see he's trying to push the country somewhere.
Yes.
Now, some of the messages and languages that actually translate on the continent, you would say these are some of the messages and languages that we need at a continental level. And as I said, I'm not quite sure whether we have people of stature like that thus far.
Well, actually, the issue of Kagame is what I wanted to bring in. When you look at the current leaders we have in Africa, you can handpick a few individuals.
Yeah.
When you look at Paul Kagame, when you go to his country, you can see that they're somehow on the right path. And then when you go to there's some countries that have also been consistent, regardless of these other issues. Kenya has also been, in terms of democracy, their record has been set, well straight, regardless of what transpires during their quest for democracy and all that. But you see that they have been on a straight path. Now, when you look at the entire country...
there's a work in progress.
When you look at the entire continent, with the exception of the people like Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, because Paul Biya of Cameroon, when you look at, those old chaps. Now, do you see among the young generation people taking over, or even those coming up? When you go to Zimbabwe, you've talked about Zimbabwe. Particularly, I love Zimbabwe. They have a good history for the continent. I even loved the way Mugabe was so bold on African issues. Now, when you look at people like Nelson Chamisa, when you go to Malawi, they had this man, Mutharika, and now they have, I'm forgetting his name.
Yeah.
Who is there right now? Do you see, could you be able to spot and say, maybe to a certain point, this person could be moving or taking their country or the continent to the right direction that we need as Africa?
As I said, unfortunately, I'm struggling. I just want to say to you that in Zimbabwe, one thing that you can give, Zimbabwe is a very ideological country. ZANU-PF as a political party is possibly one of the most ideologically conscious political parties on the continent, only next to possibly the ANC. You can have issues, their leadership, but generally they're fairly conscious. unfortunately, of course, the top echelon. I'm not quite sure of the younger generation of ANC, how seriously they're taking it. But Chamisa is a young leader of a Zimbabwean opposition party, but for information, from an ideological perspective, Chamisa leads a political party which is in contradiction with the Zimbabwean revolution. No, it doesn't have to be siding with ZANU-PF. It simply happens to be a political party which was propped up by the West. And that makes the Zimbabwean opposition continue to struggle that much. It's almost like the main opposition party in South Africa, which is seen to be white-led. But the issue is not about race. The issue is basically about ideology. So I'm not quite sure whether Chamisa, for instance, would have a similar kind of conversation with Julius Malema. Now, Malema is presented as erratic, loud, extreme, but by and large, the core of what Malema represents is fairly Africanist agenda.
Yes.
And if I was advising Malema, you basically need to dress him up a bit, and the representation of what his organization represents is basically a predominantly Africanist agenda. Now, how much some of them are realistic in global politics today is neither here nor there, but at the core. If you talk about land, if you talk about African resources, if you talk about poverty, if you talk about the downtrodden of the African persons, if you talk about the fact that you want foreign policies and foreign policies which is in cooperation rather than marginalization and exploitation, by and large, there sort of you find something, and that's what I've always cautioned my friends in the African National Congress, that they need to take Malema's party seriously, because unless they review some of the issues that Malema is talking about, South Africa is a democracy, relative democracy. So both of them are left-leaning political parties. If Malema takes the things of the downtrodden guys in Soweto, picking on from some of the things that Winnie Mandela used to talk about, then so be it. But of course, the issues are the continent. So how much of that? I get concerned, though, that I'm also not sure beyond the rhetorics, how much beyond South Africa Malema's vision of the continent is. But I'm just giving you examples or samples of those. I still believe that as a continent we're struggling with the leadership. But though, the Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo, whom I have met and whom initially I had some concerns about as possibly slightly much more a right-wing, has made rather some sensible and confident positions, and possibly one of the few leaders that have helped to make the continent proud by taking a position at a set platform, a podium with the Western leader, like that one with the French leader. So you can actually see how desperate we Africans are. So something just tiny is big. So the current Ghanaian president, you can say, is a voice. But do you feel him? I have said it again and again that the current leader of the continent, that I don't know how they would have played if they ever won elections, was possibly Raila Odinga, because of his stature, because of his boldness, and because of some of the issues that he raises. It has also been suggested that some of the reasons why foreign players push a lot of resources and efforts to make sure that he doesn't win is because they seem to be Africanist, particularly so-called left-leaning Africanist.
Could that be the same reason happening in South Africa? You see, when you've talked about Julius Malema and some of the message he has sometimes, it has a slight connection to what Raila Odinga presents. And if you go to South Africa, you would actually think that the freedom fighters would be the biggest opposition political party. Unfortunately, it's not. It's the Democratic Alliance, which is not so much heard about. Yeah. Very many people, when you talk about South Africa, it's with us outside of South Africa. We talk about the ANC and the freedom fighters.
No, I think to be fair, the freedom fighters on the continent present the vibe onto us. So it's very easy for us to get attracted by them, including a sense of flamboyance from their point of view. But as I said, remember, they're predominantly picking most of their support from traditional ANC bases. So
just to give you more statistics, in their parliament, the Economic Freedom Fighters, they have 44 members of parliament, and then the Democratic Alliance, they have 88, I think.
Yes, but I was coming there because they started from, actually they did very well in the previous election. And as I said, I think the
ANC, the ANC has around 204, 200.
Indeed, and I also think that the ANC sort of part underestimated them. So did even the Democratic Front. The Democratic Front is as an amalgam of all appetite political parties, including a softly face of Africanist agenda, more in terms of personalities but not ideology. Beyond that, it remains a right-wing political party. How, the Democratic Alliance could form a government in South Africa in the next 10 years, the ANC would have to continue making huge messes. Maybe they would have to bring a bit of a Zuma, and then there would be another Nkandla, Scandos, and then Malema would have to continue looking rather ugly in terms of what he's saying, and the media would try to sell him some extreme before the Democratic Alliance wins election within the next 10 years. Why? Because, as I said, it's really the core of a traditional old white establishment, and that is actually true. That's what they are. But if you're talking about, which is basically our conversation about big thinking African political parties, granted, of course, the Malema party becomes the populist, but populist much more really in for South Africa. The ANC remains the traditional mainstream left political party in South Africa. And by the way, beyond the media thing, on the ground structurally, that's even here in Uganda, and NRA might be very excited that I'm giving them credit. Of course I don't. You see, the way NRA has entrenched himself in the last 30 or so years, you go to most of the rural spaces, you don't see some elements of their presence, but they're there based on the infrastructure that they use. But that does not necessarily mean, therefore, that you'd basically on the surface see them. So basically, in a way, that's part of the problem in South Africa.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ochieno. And of course, we need to first take a very short breath, and then we return. But when you talk about, when you look at the entire continent, ANC is among the very few people, political parties that led their countries to independence that are still strong. Others are so much struggling. Maybe you also have, what's that of Tanzania? CCM.
Yeah.
You can even fail.
I get where you say. I know you're going for break.
Then ZANU-PF, they are also still maintaining. Dom Mnangagwa is also
but SWAPO is in charge in Namibia. In MPL is in charge in Angola, and so is Frelimo in Mozambique. Yeah, so it's not that bad, and UPC is coming back.
Well, let's take a very short break, and when we return, of course, we'll continue. We have a lot of things that we'll be discussing. Of course, we'll be talking about Mr. Museveni had to summon NRM members of parliament to go to Chankwanzi and have a fresh brainstorm on the PDM, then the homosexuality, the extravagance, and so many other things. Let's break off briefly, and we'll be back.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Looking for a pair of shoes? Less Up Stores has a wide range of selection for unisex footwear. We have the best quality of all brands at pocket-friendly prices, and we make deliveries countrywide. Just place your order or reach us on 0772 08 0090. You can also check up at Less Up Stores on all our social media platforms. Less Up, craft your own footprints.
Fellow citizens, following the sequence of events, Uganda seems to be at political crossroads.
I'm not a servant of anybody.
Madam, I know the law.
As such, Alternative Digital brings you the Interface Show with retired Colonel Dr. Kiza Besuje.
Let's keep on the same page on Alternative Digitalk.
as he gives you the alternatives on the transition question, rule of law, human rights and freedom, youth inclusion in governance, economic stagnation, as he confirms.
I'll be always here Saturday from 10 a.m. in the morning. Be there.
Don't miss the live discussion on the Alternative Uganda, Digitalk TV Facebook pages, and the Alternative Uganda YouTube channel.
Hi Rogers, can I ask you something?
Shoot.
What does corruption mean?
Well, summarily, corruption is abuse of public power for personal gain or for the benefit of a group to which one owes allegiance. For example, when a public office is abused by an official accepting or soliciting a bribe. By the way, private people can be corrupt too, like bribing police officers to escape fines.
Okay. So exactly how does that concern me?
Well, do you pay taxes?
I guess yeah. What does that have to do with this?
Everything. Because those taxes you pay are supposed to facilitate services you use, like water, electricity, roads construction, medicines in hospitals, name it.
Okay, that is much bigger than I thought. But it can be stopped, right?
Well, yes it can, although it may not be as easy as it sounds. And here is the reason why. Corruption roots are grounded in our country's social, political, economic, bureaucratic traditions and policies.
So, what has kept it going this long? I mean, why don't we stop it?
Well, the main reason why it has been here for so long is because institutions are weak, either as a result of poorly defined ethical standards of public service, weak administrative and financial systems, or ineffective watchdog agencies.
What can we do to stop it?
At a national level, we must focus on strengthening the independence and effectiveness of public institutions that fight corruption. At a personal level, we must commit to never giving a bribe.
I promise I'll never give a bribe.
Well, that's a great decision you have made. Me and you now have to spread this message to all our friends. If we all do our part, corruption will be no more.
This message is brought to you by Alternative Digitalk.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.
Welcome back from that short commercial break, and of course the hotline show continues. Well, for so many years since this NRM government came to power, they've been coming up with quite a number of programs aimed at uplifting the well-being of a common Ugandan. Unfortunately, I still ask myself questions whether those responsible for these programs have ever sat down and done a very thorough evaluation of whatever programs they've come up with. For instance, we've had programs like Operation Wealth Creation, we've had Bonabagagawari, we've had Capital Venture Fund, we have had the Youth Livelihood Program, we've had the NIOGA, we've had the NADS, we've had the Poverty Eradication Alleviation Plan Program, something like that. We now have the PDM and so many of them. Now, as we speak, the president of this country, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, General, retired, has summoned all members of parliament from the ruling party to go and replan on how to move forward with the parish development model. And as we speak, last week we were here, we talked about the poverty alleviation program within the State House, which is it's actually a village model. I do not know where that operates. I cannot even spot a single village where but it is there, and it's well facilitated, it's well funded. But the biggest question again is, why should we have programs of the nature before? Because what is being done today would have been the very first to be done at the inception of the program. Recently, I think 2 weeks back, members of parliament were sent back to their constituencies to do more study about the parish development model. Coming up with a program of this, you go to a parish and each parish is getting 100 million shillings, but no parish has less than 400 people. Actually, the average population per parish should be, it's around 400 people. And now you're giving 100 million to each parish. You can go to a parish, actually not even 400 people. A parish, only a village has like 300 people, 300, 400. So you find a parish having like 10 villages or plus. And now each parish is being given 100 million shillings, all in the name of fighting poverty. Just as we speak, recently, I think yesterday, the Minister for Disaster, State Minister Nyakunu, Esther Nyakunu, was telling us they have gotten money and they are distributing money to people in Bulambuli, Bodadiri, so that they can do other programs and, you know, because those living in disaster-prone areas. And now there is even a time we had Mr. Museveni carrying sacks of money, distributing them in Busoga. And when you do an assessment, if you go back to Busoga and trying to trace those people who were given money from sacks, where are they now? So, is this the right path? Do you see any progress? Do you see any rays of sunshine, rays of hope within the parish development model?
I'm very tired about discussing this subject. I can tell you quite honestly. When the subject first came up a few years ago, I used my Sunday column in the Monitor, which was then active, to give an alternative, to give my thoughts on these things, and I did again. I later went on to met one or two people who were involved in this program. One of them concedes that their idea was not the PDM as presented, and certainly not PDM as a panacea to poverty, and PDM not as maybe the 10th program of the NRA 10-point program, and attempts from the Bonabaga, whatever, as you said, to this other one. No, this NRA regime is a regime in shambles. This country has been very unlucky to have Mr. Museveni. NRA has been very lucky to have the blessing of Ugandans, although they got it by force, but to allow them to stay this long. You are absolutely right to suggest that it's extraordinary that legislators are ganged up and taken, not to Uganda Management Institute, which, by the way, used to be called the Institute of Public Administration. So so now I'm just talking about the Uganda Management Institute down the road here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was called Institute of Public Administration. So the NRA guys changed, and I'm sure somebody thought you'd be using big words. You can actually see where we are. So they could have taken them to the Institute of Public Administration, but they've taken it to a retreat into Chankwanzi. I have big issues with Chankwanzi. I don't know the people who go to Chankwanzi. I don't know whether you've ever been invited to Chankwanzi. I don't know whether our young, beautiful camera lady has ever been invited to Chankwanzi. I don't know how many young, ordinary Ugandan viewers have been invited to Chankwanzi. It's an NRA thing. And now they call it a National Leadership Institute, which is basically our money. The Chankwanzi thing is basically theft. If you're talking wealth, you realize that the people in Chankwanzi are putting on military combat. Much earlier we were talking about, the fact that our poor boys and girls who perished in Somalia. So this regime is neither here nor there when it comes to some of these things. So these guys, legislators, are dressed up in military uniform. I have had issues that, what is the object? What's the purpose? And then number 3, when is my good young friend Robert Chagulanyi going to mobilize his team to go to Chankwanzi and use that open public facility? I want to tell you that as soon as my leadership issue is resolved in Uganda People's Congress, I will be writing, and I will be hoping that I will be given the opportunity to go and talk to and train my young UPC leaders and leaders of the future in Chankwanzi, because it's supposed to be a public facility. But now to make it a much more serious point, at whose expense? So you're a journalist. I am asking journalists, and we're supposed to be discussing press freedom in this country today. I am asking journalists to establish, including investigative journalists, including ordinary day-to-day news journalists, to be able to ask, who is funding this Changkwanzi retreat, and you'll realize that it's basically all our money. So if you consider the amount of money that is going to Changkwanzi, that Museveni is using openly, freely, and you guys are clapping for him, then you can see how much, even if PDM was a real program, you will see how you guys are just being abused.
Well, Mr. Museveni coming up to summon his members of parliament to discuss on how best they can implement PDM. Is that the right approach?
I was coming to that because I was saying, if PDM was a program, which was a government program, PDM should have come as a manifesto item from a political organization called, say, NRA, which they are. If they did that and they form a government, that becomes a government program. It's not a party program. Number two, when it becomes a party program, the job of legislators is to legislate, really, and it's not to go ahead and distribute money. And so really where PDM is at the moment, it should be no longer in the hands of NRA legislators. If it was...
That's a local government.
If it was Mr. Museveni trying to sell this program to his legislators and they're waiting, they would have done so in a conversation, but that conversation would normally have been at the delegates conference, in which the delegates approve or disapprove. That's how governments work. But of course here we don't have a government. We have got a regime which is basically a property controlled by an individual, but unfortunately all of us citizens find ourselves into it. So I don't know what will come out there as magic. So you realize that I really don't have much energy to discuss it. The nearest to PDM is the great cooperative societies, which Museveni doesn't want to talk about because it was UPC driven and extremely successful. And if it was not cooperatives, many of the people in his cabinet would never have seen beyond the villages of their own homes. So Mr. Museveni and your team, just have some sense of humility. Put up your hands and say, in many of these things you failed. Let's review, let's go back and then say, credit to UPC, credit to DP, whatever the case. Maybe even credit to, credit to some priest. He said this in church, I listened to it, and then we went ahead and experimented and it worked. No, Changkwanzi is a fraud, as much as PDM is a fraud. NRA has got no clue about programs that enable communities, enable nations. They failed in our public programs. I won't tell you that for the second time I've come into your studios and I've had to leave my car 3 miles in order to arrive at your program, at your studios in time because of traffic. And that traffic is not really any traffic moving, but some funny roadworks. And it's just a system around Kampala that just fails. I left 30 minutes earlier than I thought I would. Those, if systems like that cannot work, if your program today, I'm sure almost certainly using generator, rather than guarantee for electricity, if I am putting on a fantastic shirt, and you did not even say how smart I am, but I want to tell you that this morning, it was not my plan to put on this shirt. I put on the shirt because yesterday there was some funny, tiny wind and rain. And by 11 o'clock, power had gone off. I woke up in the morning at 5 o'clock preparing, and I had no ironed shirt. So I had to take this, which had been particularly ironed. But as I said, this is now breaking news. It was not my plan to put on this shirt today, but I'm delighted that it's there because you guys have been inboxing me saying that I'm very smart. Thank you, very kind. So that is the nature of the state of our country. I want to tell you also that within the last few days, I've got a young Ugandan, a young economist actually, who got an accident up country, and they nearly bled to fatality, from early afternoon to late evening. They're in a private health facility in a particular town in the Republic of Uganda, and they needed 280,000 shillings, and they didn't have that money for treatment. The following day, I understand they needed 62,000 shillings for drugs. there is something going on in this country, and I know we're about to be discussing some other things regarding how these guys play around with their national monies and with their national till, you know, is extraordinary. So, no, let's not give these guys any further attention. Let's ask, what is it, as you rightly say, why should Mr. Museveni be discussing with all his legislators this? Are they going to be the implementers? Have they become local government officials? Have they become agricultural finance extension workers in rural officers in rural places? What exactly are they? You know, or is it the case that, well, they're realizing that they're now going to regroup, you know, and to see how they're able to deal with the NSSF shambles, they're able to deal with the Loboa Hospital shambles, they're able to deal with the Mabati thieves, and they're able to calm themselves down and come and throw certain things in their face so that we forget about the fact, and they will not forget that Mr. Museveni is leading a regime of thieves. Those guys in Chankwanzi are predominantly thieves. Those guys in Chankwanzi are predominantly thieves. Mr. Museveni's deputy is implicated. Mr. Museveni's Prime Minister is implicated. Mr. Museveni's deputy Prime Minister is implicated. Mr. Museveni's Speaker indeed and deputies are implicated. Mr. Museveni's chief whip, the one who's supposed to whip the others for good manners, is an excellent exemplar of thieving these things, iron sheets, from the poorest of the poor. And Mr. Museveni's finance minister, the man, by the Ugandans get worried, be worried. The person actually has got keys to your money on behalf of Mr. Museveni as his finance minister, thieved iron sheets. So this is the shambles that we're talking to. These guys are regrouping in Chankwanzi to come and bring you all we care about it. No.
Planning for another loot.
Programming for another loot as they calm you down. Wake up, Ugandans.
Well, thank you so much. I think we may not go much into that conversation of the PDM. We all know right from your communities where you're watching us from, you know, whether this PDM thing will really take you to the prosperity Mr. Museveni and his team normally talk about, or it is just a sham, a scam, like Mr. Ochieno puts it. Well, there is one crisis in this country. When you look at the expenditure in so many government departments, so many government offices, State House, Parliament, you would even think, you'd be forced to think that maybe Uganda is a developed country. Recently, I just learned that Mr. Museveni puts on new clothes every day. And that dressing for Mr. Museveni on a daily basis, it costs you and me and someone watching us 1 million shillings on a daily. I have never seen Mr. Museveni donating his clothes, that he has been putting on the previous days, donating them to vulnerable communities.
Maybe it takes.
I remember the Karamajongs recently, they wanted each and every, if they would take even a cup if you had to donate, if you had anything to donate. They would take as small things like a cup, a fork, a spoon, and you know, I've never seen Mr. Museveni do that. But we are buying suits, clothes for him, 1 million shillings on a daily. Surprisingly, me, I see the same shirt every day. I see, so.
And surprisingly, I don't want to judge. I'm not quite sure whether his shirt is as smart as what I'm putting on, you know? So this million thing, man. But carry on.
Well, we dress him 1 million shillings on a daily. This is ridiculous in such a country. Mr. Museveni uses power for State House. Okay, let me not talk about Mr. Museveni.
Yeah.
State House uses power for 500 million shillings. This is too much. Mr. Museveni spends not less than 2 billion shillings every time you see his convoy heading somewhere. Not less than 2 billion shillings. And the question is, how do we run this country?
During break, you were telling me about my good friend, Madam Speaker's budget. And I was reminding you that there was her budget plus her deputy. I don't remember the figures. Did you manage to get the figures?
Let me get the figures here.
I want to say that as you look for the figures, you're absolutely right that for Mr. Museveni, who talks security and talks stability and talks revolution and talks popularity, I don't know how far your home village is from Luwero, but the people of Luwero so much love this guy that they gave them their only everything, in 1986. So the great guy needs to be carried shoulder high. But the guy who's supposed to be carried shoulder high, when you see his angry-looking convoy, the fleets of a village of cars, aren't they, of vehicles?
It's 13.1 billion.
13.1 billion. So I don't know what 1 billion Uganda shillings could do to possibly to a village. Interestingly, you talk about 100 million, but I don't know what 1 billion Uganda shillings could do to a village. But I want
office only.
But I'm saying, and I'm giving you context. So if that is 13 billion Uganda shillings for the office of Mr. Museveni Speaker, remember that recently young beautiful doctors were whipped. Remember? Merely seeking to be formally employed. Remember, as I said, part of the other Karamojong people, and in fact, let's remember that the guys who demonstrated against the Karamoja theft of Mr. Museveni's team, some of them are still in prison. And this is coming to 2 months nearly, and it's important we talk about them. But it is theft related to it, and we talk about money. So that's 13 billion Uganda shillings. I don't know what 13 billion Uganda shillings would do to schools in my Toro district. Schools, not a school, but schools in my Toro district. I don't know how much 13 billion Uganda shillings would do, how far it would go for sorting out sanitary pads for young girls, particularly where there's the boarding schools or day schools. But young girls, particularly those predominantly need, and for when it comes to some of these other things, you can't even class define them or categorize them. I don't know what 13 billion Uganda shillings could do. I just gave you an example for a young, beautiful graduate who hardly has a job in the last 3 or so years. Fantastic economist, works around me, but was looking for hardly 300,000 Uganda shillings the other day, in part because the local health facility, meaning the public state facility, meaning government hospitals, don't have the medication, but she can't afford it. So the NRS system is a huge fraud. But let me tell you something else. You've seen photographs of police stations doing the round, haven't you?
Yep.
Those police stations would predominantly have been built during Obote 1 government. Some others, minus the retires, may have been completed during a means time. And I also know a barracks that was built fully during a means time. I have actually told, I don't know whether it's this program, uniforms for police, in terms of police accommodation, extraordinarily shocking, that are now half the size. They're now like one-room camping thing, which are being built for police people. So you talk about 13 billion Uganda shillings, and at the same time, you have a convoy.
Actually, I wanted to put some information right.
Yeah.
I mentioned 2 billion shillings. It's 600 million every day.
For
State House and the President.
Actually, you need to review your figures because there's a figure of 2 billion shillings or thereabout.
Oh.
So you're absolutely not wrong. And if they're wrong, let them come and give us the right information, and I'll apologize on your behalf. So that is basically the thing. So if you look at the convoy of say in this case, Madam Speakers, I saw Milton Obote's convoy, and I saw Paul Mwanga's convoy. And those are sort of the only convoys I saw. I wasn't lucky enough to see, say, the Army Chief's convoy, and I'm not sure there were really many vehicles, except possibly maybe an anti-tank truck, mounted truck, plus another vehicle. And that is within the context of the fact that Museveni had all his terror machines around Kampala. So I wonder, the last Mr. Speaker, Francis Butagira, who is my hero, traveled, the last speaker in Obote II government, in Kampala, traveled in one Mercedes-Benz car which was uniform for all ministers, if I can recall, okay? Except I think the Prime Minister had a different class of car, and Mercedes-Benz, and I think the Vice President. But all the other ministers had same make of Mercedes-Benz. But they had their driver plus one police officer. Can I emphasize that, my brother?
Please.
One driver plus one police officer. Now, what kind of waste is Mr. Museveni subjecting this country? How much debt are our children supposed to pay? And how much debt? For me, I'm hitting my pensionable age, in the next decade or so. I don't know how much you're going to be paying as a burden by these guys. So you need to be able to contextualize that. So it is a national shame, the amount of money that goes to the Speaker's office, the amount of money that goes to the Deputy Speaker's office, the amount of money Mr. Museveni uses for those, not so particularly smart shoes. For me, I'm not a designer, but my young, beautiful 80-year-old daughter would design a fantastic stuff for Mr. Museveni, and we could actually donate for him some clothing, like some of these ones would be UPC clothing. We donate. We are very generous people in Uganda Post Congress. We share. Ubodi told me that, Joe, for us in UPC, we work hard. We build, we do everything, and we cook. And once UPC's food is ready, fellow citizens, we put it here. Look, young man, put it here. And once we put it on here, on UPC's high table, what we worked hard for, said, Joe, that becomes Uganda's high table. You get it? I'm actually trying to tell you how I feel. Ugandans really, truly need to wake up. They are being ripped to the extreme by this regime.
Well, the question of how much is spent in State House, it should be everyone's concern. You see, we are living in a country that struggles even to fund and finance its budget.
Yeah.
But when you look at the extravagance of our leaders, it really tells where we are headed as a country. I am actually concerned in knowing now who is Museveni's designer. There could be something behind that. There must be something behind the 1 million shillings that goes to that gentleman's dressing every. Just like you've said.
Are you sure you're not being just jealous?
No, I am not. I am just. I really am just being inquisitive, and
Yes.
you would be shocked maybe the country would be shocked if we actually happen to get who is the designer, who is that person cashing, pocketing the 1 million shillings on a daily.
Yeah.
First of all, he has tried to make the president look smart. He has.
No, actually, very interestingly, and I know we have to simplify this in order to drive the point home. I put on suits from a particular departmental store around where I lived most of my exile life, and I don't buy from many other stores. That store is Marks & Spencer's. I've said it again and again and again. But Marks & Spencer's is a store that used to receive fabrics, completed clothes from Nightil in Jinja and African Textile Mill in Bali. Built Uganda's economy, fast robotic government, So we used to sell fabrics to these Marks & Spencer. And Marks & Spencer, the days were the top league. Now it's average. Now, so you see, this country, within 8 years of independence, we were able to turn our cotton to oils and many other things, and also to produce fabrics of top-notch global. And we sold finished products. And by that, they're predominantly what I put on. So not particularly higher, and possibly unlikely, usually lower. They're good. The point is actually, when I go there, I don't really shop for the ones of the upper end. I go to the average. So actually, sometimes I even go to the ones which are cells or from factory shops. And you know, this, you fellow Ugandans, you know, Ochieno is sharing with his life story, you know. And you know, I don't know whether I have ever bought a suit worth more than 300 pounds, meaning more than a million Uganda shillings. Now that is new game. But every other time I look at even some of those that are bought for less than equivalent of 600,000 Uganda shillings, I look at them and I feel so comfortable in them. Then I say, but now what's Mr. Museveni also putting on? You know? Yeah. Is there something going on?
But me, I see the same dressing every day. I see the same, I see that oversized shirt and the trousers. It's the same thing I see every day. Well, this is the Hotline Show, and we are really bothered by our own country, and sometimes we bring these discussions because we really have a great zeal to see that our country moves forward to the right direction. Now, you've talked about, you've already sent in your sympathies and to the families of those who lost their dear ones in Somalia. As we speak, we know that I don't know how to say this, undisclosed number of Ugandan soldiers in Somalia. The place is called Bahamare. That is around 80 miles away from Mogadishu. That is at the camp of the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, at MIS. Initially, this was called the AMISON, the African Union Mission in Somalia. And now, after whatever went through, they now have that leadership in Somalia, which is called the Federal Somalia Government, the Federal Government of Somalia. So now the ATMIS, the African Transition Mission, African Union Transmission Mission in South Africa, is there to ensure that they support the federal government of Somalia on see how they can fight, you know, and neutralize the Al-Qaeda forces. And now as we speak, now the Al-Shabaab, you know, attacked the ATMIS base, killing, according to some reports, they talk about 137 Ugandans. Of course, our local, our military officers here do not speak about the figures, how many lives were lost. But when you see the level of their, when you listen to their, when you read their statements, you see that it was a grave attack. I saw Mr. Museveni's tweet about this, and like, we are going to retaliate, you know, we are going to fight back, we are going to do this. They've also sent the commander of land forces, I think, to go and do an investigation. You know, this tells that it was a grave attack. Unfortunately, they're not telling us how many people have died. Now, you've talked about the need for, in our African Union conversation, how governments then struggle to see that there is, they support one another. Could this be one of the agenda for Mr. Museveni, that we are seeing him in West Africa, we are seeing him in Congo, in Somalia, and now our soldiers are dying? Is this worth losing lives for our Ugandan soldiers?
I don't know how many of your viewers have been following some of our conversation, indeed my conversations. We as UPC, and I was one of those early leaders who were strongly opposed to the Ugandan forces being deployed in Somalia as early as that time. That still remains our position. But like I said earlier, right now we know that they're grieving families. And so once again, expressing my sincere condolences. But those condolences are then backed by concerns that I continue to wonder, was it worth it, and is it worth it, which is part of what you're saying. I am not one of those ones who's been convinced by the reason that has been given. I know that the deployment in Somalia followed almost certainly a deal between the US and others who were looking for African boots on the ground to go and cleanse Anglo-American mess in Somalia. And I think Mr. Museveni was quite clearly available to offer his services. Unfortunately, those services that involve the lives of our children. I talk as somebody who has got close families who are in the army and other security services. But also that whatever the reason that had been given does not warrant, because around the time that we were sending soldiers there, we were still in active conflict almost in northern Uganda, and almost mini active conflict with Congo. Even then, we are a post-conflict country. We are not yet ready fully, sufficiently well defended. So I'm not quite sure whether expeditions elsewhere would or should really be our priority. Our priority should be consolidating, if any, security and peace we have in our own country. Number two, the resources that we actually mobilize that we would otherwise use as war machines elsewhere, it should be geared towards reconstruction of the conflict areas, particularly in the north and in the east. And if I may say so, even Luwero urgently needs money, urgently needs development, urgently needs rehabilitation, urgently needs services, including the only hospitals that UPC built in those places, including some of the only roads in Luwero. We still need those resources. So our resources and our focus and our energy should be focused onto that in our country. Then, our own security. How does Somalia threaten Ugandans' sovereignty? Our immediate threat is Congo, our borders. There was never a threat that Congo was going to invade us. Not Sudan, possibly Sudan when we had issues with them, and it was a retaliatory thing, whereas there was, and we know Sudan, we were backing one group and Sudan was backing the other, and not Kenya, and not Tanzania. So, granted, when you say that, people say that there was bombings that took place in Kampala. Those Kampala bombings where we lost our lives, people lost lives for nothing, were retaliatory attacks. I'm saying at the beginning, the first deployment, did Uganda have to deploy in Somalia? The answer is absolutely not. Do we need to be in Somalia today? My answer is absolutely not. But that then said, this is where we are. We condole and we mourn and we grieve that our citizens have died, unfortunately, in big numbers. Then comes the important point. I was actually very shocked, extremely disappointed that once this happened, the first communication from Mr. Museveni, instead of rallying the country to in shock and the extent of the havoc that seemed to have happened against our people, it was almost like a laissez-faire, by the way, almost just even blaming the soldiers that, look, this thing happened. On the one hand, blaming them, they sort of like, they panicked, and on the other, we shall punish those chaps very much. But we've been punishing, we shall punish. So really, there was no statesmanship in this statement and position. And then you have to address the country. Our sons and daughters, you don't have to have a relative. So Mr. Museveni needed to have addressed the Republic of Uganda, fellow citizens. This country is mourning 1, 2, 3, 4 of your sons and daughters. Or we have been attacked, we've lost lives, we are still working on the numbers of casualties, dead or no injured. That is what states, men and women, do. Mr. Museveni did not do it. Do you know why? As I told at the beginning, the guy runs this country as if it's his kraal business of a few herds of cattle. You know?
Mr. Ochieno, when after experiencing such attacks to a camp where Ugandan soldiers are based, we of course know what the Al-Shababs have, what they have done to this country. Could that be another spark of and preparation, a message to the country to prepare for hard times ahead?
I hope not, and it cannot be. It would be very irresponsible for us to put this country in the scare, in the state of scare. No, I do not know, but I think what is certain is that this is something that happened in Somalia. It didn't happen elsewhere. So possibly the message is that, you know, you're in our country, but we can still deal with you. You know, and maybe you're in our country, maybe review your position, which is basically what I would ask Mr. Museveni to urgently review the position. In fact, if there's one other thing that I was actually adding into some of the other conversation, is that part of the debate we should be having now, instead of this guy is actually eating our chicken and maize and beans in Chankwanzi, I'm actually jealous. You know, Parliament should be recalled, an emergency session should be held to have a conversation, to have a discussion and review of this. And I also want to see leadership, which is the other thing. I want to see leadership from our friends in NUP. I want to understand and know what their positions are. I want to know what the position of our friends in FDC. I want to know the position of the guys in DP. You know, I want to know the position of our friends in ANC. My view is that this is an urgent matter. Of course, some of my friends in UPC who would claim to speak for Uganda People's Congress, and now they've got their mouths shut. And if anything, some of the shaky position is because they share part of the loot with the NRA. But look, that's really what should be happening. I think that we must acknowledge that these guys are serious guys. We must acknowledge that the message may be more than for Uganda, should really be for the rest of the occupying forces, as they would see. But maybe it's also a message for us, that as the rest of Africa, that in many cases we are fighting too many wars on behalf of proxy powers around the world, for which now Africa, in this case Somalia, is the start of that. But you might be asking, because even the Islamist thing, the regional grievances were not in Africa. The regional grievances were really in the Middle East. Many of these things cropped up from what people perceive as the injustices around Arab-Israeli conflict, and later by how the Americans particularly dealt with Iran and Iraq in conflicts, created the war, it pushed Saddam Hussein to go and kill Iranians. Then eventually Saddam Hussein became a spoilt boy. Then the first Gulf War, second Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, which is was also initially this deal between the Cold War thing between Russia, Soviet Union then, and the US. Sort of this is the thing which is spill over here. So Islamic terrorism, yes, is a big issue, and it's a big issue which is not necessarily something that we can confine to NRA in Uganda, but this is not how we're going to deal with it. And let me say this very quickly. I'm always very proud to say that in this country of ours, most of the Muslims in our country are open, modest, progressive, and as a liberal society and in a country which is secular, we live side by side and work with, and we are very much together. And, you know, the question of Islamic extremism traditionally should not arise in this republic. Except, therefore, then when our leaders, in their very expansionist and sometimes self-centered strategic interests going elsewhere, they go to create for us enmity, and in the process invite, unfortunately, some of these extremist tendencies in our country. That's what I would say as far as this concept. But generally, thankfully, in Uganda, and I hope it continues that way, we are open and progressive, and most of our Muslims are secular, and I am delighted to be to associate with this Uganda in that way. We only want, of course, we want freedom. We just are a bit tired of NRA, you know.
Well, the question of how many people have died in Somalia
Yeah.
remains classified as per now. Maybe we hope at an ample moment, upon time.
I think it's extremely irresponsible, actually. I know that unless they don't really want people to panic, it will be in a country in which we have democratic accountability. Had there been a democracy in this country, public perception is such that if Mr. Museveni does not handle the response of that, and particularly the fact that many more people have died than average, would mean possibly either resignation of a government or perhaps them being punished at the next election. And so, no, you don't have your citizens die and then you keep the country, just keep quiet. You know, you can't. Because that's actually being disrespectful to the dead. That is being disrespectful to the families.
To the families,
that
yes.
is being disrespectful to
the
the
country,
citizens,
yes.
to the country. You know, so no, we need to know how many of our people died so that we understand the magnitude and the gravity of the situation.
Well, yes, we expect maybe we are yet to hear from the army spokesperson on how many lives we have actually lost. And of course, when
I'm really sorry again, because I know I was having this conversation elsewhere. At this level, the magnitude of the incident in Somalia, as seen by a series of social media things going around, is so huge that that statement should not be coming from the army spokesperson or some army commander. That statement, in the very least, must be the Minister of Defense. If not, this is a message that must be coming from the president, particularly because he's the one who pulled our boys and girls and took them there. It must be the president and or Minister of Defense. And by the way, in other countries, in democracies, and perhaps if I was actually the president of the Republic of Uganda, if the defense anomalies like Mr. Museveni seems to be talking that this was a business of who either people who are relatives, blood clean, whatever, are the ones who go down there because of money, it would mean that it's a resignation matter. So maybe perhaps the Minister for Defense would now be resigning. That is what happens in democracy, and that's what would happen under UPC administration.
Wow, I like that you said that's what would happen. It just remains a wish. Maybe, you never know. Well, we are here to find out and hear from those in charge, probably maybe Mr. Museveni, the president of this country, maybe the army, maybe the chief of defense forces. I don't know, whoever will be available to speak to the country, and we are very much eager to know how many lives we have lost in Somalia. Well, reading the statement, by Mr. Museveni, by the president, saying that maybe some soldiers panicked. Of course, we have many undertones here, and I am yet to find out. Maybe one time I'll be able to invite the army spokesperson to speak about this, that many people even have to incur some kitu kidogo for them to be able to be taken to Somalia. And so when Mr. Museveni says there was maybe some soldiers panicked, and we do not expect a panic on such a mission. Could maybe it also takes us back to how ready are these people who are taken anyway for such missions? Do they even understand why they are there? You are living in a base, a military base is not really an entertainment center. It's not a museum.
No, but I think we don't want to be unfair to the soldiers, and that's why I'm very particular about this, that Mr. Museveni was being very unfair to them. Soldiers, once you've been passed, you expect to be called to duty at any time, yes, to go anywhere. Actually, I find a contradiction, and you're right. There is a statement doing the rounds. It's a video statement, and I think it's Museveni's address to his parliament, or his legislators, where he says that that one of the mistakes is that some of his soldiers are moving away from the original NRA. I don't know whether you saw that clip. So saying that, well, and that was actually the background to monetizing the conversation, where he was saying that, because people have moved away from the original NRA position, that is why things went wrong. So he's actually accusing his own army, that his own army is now becoming highly commercialized, a military, unlike the NRA. The only thing I want to say is that I'm old enough to know that the NRA was a rather a difficult army to be neighbors with in Luweero, and the people of Luweero are there to testify. So I'm not quite sure what Mr. Museveni is saying. He was trying to suggest that, his NRA were a group of volunteers who were coming around to liberate Uganda. So the liberation of Uganda maybe is now the PDM, but anyway, we shall wait and see.
Well, okay, we just like I said earlier on, we are yet to hear from the you said you don't want this statement to come from the spokesperson.
I don't expect it to come
CDF?
from. Yes, and I'm teaching them, and I'm saying very deliberately, teaching them, but in others I'm forming Ugandans. In democracies which Mr. Museveni claims to be, and in modern nations and modern nation states, these are matters that should be statements that should come from President's office, and President should come out with a bit of tears rather than actually whipping up boys as if these guys are some askari trainees for looking after departmental stores, or for some of these guys who may have built them using Mabati money.
And one of the questions would be that could these soldiers on such missions, could they be demotivated? That at a particular point they're not motivated enough to even defend themselves. If you look at some of the clips moving on different social media platforms, you'd really wonder, what is really happening, and the kind of people, the criteria that was used. I don't want to say that our soldiers are not trained. Even Mr. Museveni said these soldiers are well trained in his statement, and only that they lack the equipment to defend themselves. And then another question again, why do you deploy very good people when they do not have enough ammunition to execute the mission?
Do you know, again in democracies and under a future UPC government, if there were ever deployment, I hope then we would use the power of democracy, so that power of diplomacy, so that there would be no military. What governments would be doing, what Mr. Museveni would have done to the nation would be to explain to the nation the mission and the context of logistics involved. When parliamentary debates are taking place, they would also be discussing logistics and equipment and readiness, combat readiness for the army. So all this normally would have taken place, but of course they didn't, because the Museveni, as I said, treats this army just like his kraal business. But that said, I think it would be unfair for the soldiers under the circumstance that this attack therefore means that they're ill-equipped, rather ill-trained. Equipped, yes. Ill-equipped, yes. And I don't know in terms of detail. For that, I want to try and be as objective as I possibly can. But I think a surprise attack is a surprise attack. And Mr. Museveni is a terror machine himself. Mr. Museveni ran an NRA banditry around Kampala. Mr. Museveni trained young boys and girls, to gun through grenades around Kampala, and around Kawempe, around Kampala, around particularly the other end, Kawempe and around Kiboga and Chiboga, as my good camera lady would pronounce. I know how to pronounce it. Chiboga. Younger lady, I know it is Chiboga, not Kiboga. and then throw grenades on moving taxis. So Mr. Museveni, meaning surprise. They will go to taxi park and blow up a tire, and people would run. That is what terrorism and terror is, an NRA expert. So they know these things are, that's how they came to power. So they know. So I think to suggest that because these guys were surprised, and so therefore it's because of the money that we're receiving, I think it's neither here nor there. I think that's very unfair to the Ugandan soldiers, particularly Ugandan boys and girls who died and who have been affected in this. The issue is not that. The issue is maybe then you go ahead and give credit, in this way, credits to Al-Shabaab's capacity in terms of training, Al-Shabaab's drive in terms of originality objective. Remember, these are guys who are absolutely driven either by the Islamic faith in this case, or the object of their mission, and in this case, they believe Somalia is their nation state and we are invaders and we are occupiers and we should leave. So it's much more, but they had much more stronger motivation to dare these guys in the base. I'm not quite sure it's about anything to do with the motivation of the average Ugandan soldier who found himself in Somalia. Because at the same end of the day, I'm not quite sure when you've been surrounded that you will try and say that, well, I'm not going down there. If it's about going to play football, it's neither here nor there. I'm asking young people to join the UPC. Some of them say, oh, but we're waiting for you to be president first. So if it was a situation in which people are substantially surrounded, a matter of life and death, I'm not quite sure whether somebody is going to wait for certain conditionalities. Not at all.
Well, Mr. Ochieno, I am afraid we need to get out of this place, and I'll need to get your parting shot, and then we call it a day.
Yes, as I said, for me, I'll conclude with my condolences to the families of the Ugandan troops who've lost their lives and injured in Somalia, and I hope that as we wait for Mr. Museveni to clearly give us a statement on the casualties, on the circumstances, and including on his allegations that there were deals, money deals. I know we've had ghost soldiers, we've got ghost teachers, I know we've got ghost Pineti, I know we've got ghost Loboa, I know we've got ghost Iron Sheets, I know we've got ghost NSSF, and ghost can go get, ghost Gavi funds, ghost Gavi funds, ghost malaria, ghost NRA ghost. I know what these ghosts. Mr. Museveni needs to come and tell us about this ghost thing that overwhelmed our people so that our citizens could lose their lives unnecessarily in Somalia. 1. 2, that Mr. Museveni, when are you bringing back our boys and girls from Somalia? And Mr. Museveni, when that happens, how are you going to deal with the people who would have played business with the livelihood of our children who have been affected and died and their families in Somalia? Those are the demands we want to have from Mr. Museveni. But beyond that, in conclusion, Mr. Museveni, please be kind enough and check your excesses. Please start spending less on those funny suits. They actually don't suit you. Start ensuring that your team spend less, including your speakers. Please, Mr. Museveni, none of your junior ministers are in the security risk. Please, there's no need for them to have convoys. But senior ministers did not have convoys. There's no reason why your junior ministers should have convoys. Mr. Museveni, we are a relatively struggling, poor country. What capacity to be rich? But no, we need these monies to inject in education. We need to inject them in health. We need to inject them in agriculture. We need to inject them in infrastructure. We need to inject them in technology. We need to inject them in the environment. And we need to inject them the possibilities for the youth of this country. Mr. Museveni, save the future of this country. Give hope to young citizens of this country.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ochieno. I really thank you for your time always to be part of, this show on a weekly basis. We really, really thank you for that. And of course, the kind of ideas, the kind of insights you share with us. It's not only for only this show, but I believe even those who maybe review these recordings later on, I am very sure they pick something for the good of this country. Well, this brings us to the end of tonight's edition of the Hotline Show. And my name is Al-Shabab-Updf. I want to wish you a great night. And of course, I want to thank the team I have worked with, Lillian on camera, the team in the studios, Arnold, Ali, and many other people. Thank you so much for putting this together, and have a great night.
The Alternative Digitalk. Real issues, real talk.